Welcome, DMs and Dungeon Divers. Today we're going to talk about conditions. In the Appendix A of the Player's Handbook and also the basic rules, there's 14 conditions. Today we're going to talk about the first 7, so come on in and set for a spell. I'm Jimmy Lee, the Rude DM, and this is Ability Check. Roll it. Okay, remember, D&D is a game that's put out by Wizards of the Coast. And also remember, if you like the information I'm giving you, hit that subscribe, that like, and that bell so you don't miss anything that I'm going to bring to you. Okay, today we're going to talk about conditions. And we're going to talk about the first 7 because we're actually going to talk about what conditions are. But if you look in the Player's Handbook on page 290, and if you look at the basic rules on page 171, you'll find the list of the 14 conditions. So we're going to talk about conditions and get to the first 7. So we're going to talk about conditions. How do we get conditions? Conditions could be something that can affect your opponent or they can affect you. The idea is to make it affect your opponent. There's a couple in there that's good for you if it happens to you, but most of them are not so much. But anyway, so you want to try to get that to happen to your opponent. Now, how do we get these conditions? Well, it can happen from attacks, spell effects, class features, almost anything like that. And it also can happen naturally. Like sleeping makes you incapacitated, unconscious, and prone. So anyway, but let's go on and talk about other things. And also we're talking about can conditions stack. What I mean by stacking is have one condition on top of another. Like I just gave the example. If you're asleep, you're incapacitated, you're unconscious, and you're prone. There you go. Incapacitated, yeah, because you're unconscious. You know, you can't do anything, so you're going to be incapacitated for a little bit of time. But anyway, let's get on this. Yes, you can have conditions that stack, and you have to resolve these conditions, usually one at a time, but sometimes you can get them all done at one time. See, like if you're asleep, they can wake you up. Then you're not incapacitated, you're not unconscious, but you're still prone, and that on your turn you can actually take care of that. But we can go to another thing too, is that the same condition stack, not necessarily true, especially like the poison one. Here's what happens is, somebody hits you with a poison blade. Now it depends on what the poison is. Sometimes the poison says it's going to have damage plus the poison condition. But we're going to worry about the poison condition. The poison condition means that when you fail your saving throw, then you're poisoned for 1 minute. All right? But anyway, what happens if you get hit by the same poison the next round and you fell? Does it give you 2? No, it just means that you actually start all over again from 1. Because remember, it says 1 minute and there's 10 rounds in 1 minute. So that means that by that time, you have to start all over again. So it's actually easier in gameplay, but that's okay. Here now we're going to talk about the conditions. The blinded. Blinded means that you or your opponent can't see. You automatically fail any kind of check that requires sight. Also, attacks on the person that's blinded have advantage because it's like the person being invisible. And also the person that is blinded has disadvantage on their attacks. Well, there's a little bit more that's going to go to that. One thing is you actually basically have to know where the person is to actually try to attack them. And that's going to take probably a perception check for hearing and something similar to that. But like I said, disadvantage on attacks. If you are blinded, if you're not blinded and your opponent's blinded, then you have advantage on attacks. Number 2 is charmed. Okay, let's talk about charmed in the first place. A lot of people have misconceptions about charm. Unless the effect specifically says it, what happens with charm is just this. This means that you cannot attack or cast a spell against the person that charms you. That's all it means. All right, that means that you are more likely to view them as a friend, and that's it. They cannot make you do anything that you don't want to do, but they do have advantage on all kinds of like persuasion checks and things like that to you to get you to do something. Here's another thing about this charm spell. The charm spell is a spell and it has a verbal component, so that means it's going to be loud, and the person that gets charmed, when they come out of the charm effect, they will realize that they have a spell has been cast on them, and they might not be so happy about it. So be careful with it when you're using the charm spell, but it's a very good spell to get you what you want. Number 3 is deafen. That means that you fail any kind of ability checks that requires hearing. Here's something else too for wizards you need to remember. If your spell has a verbal component, you can't cast it because you can't hear it. You can't hear yourself speak it right. You just can't do it. Deafen can also be happen because you are in a silenced area. Same thing. Also, if you're deafened, you need to actually say on your certain magical items require a verbal command to actually activate. You won't be able to use those. A lot of them do, some of them don't. Any kind of wand or staff actually requires you to say the command word, and if you're deafened, you can't do that. Number 4 is frightened. Okay, frightened is a spell or an effect like dragon fear or anything like that. If you fail your saving throw and you are frightened, you have disadvantage on any kind of ability check or attack roll on anything, as long as the person or any or object or monster that has put that frightened condition on you is within line of sight. You want to move away as fast as you can, and you cannot willingly move closer to the actual thing that's actually making you frightened. Number 5 is grapple. Okay, let's talk about grapple real quick. Remember, grapple is also an attack. So that means that you can give up your attack and use a grapple. Grapple means that you have to roll a strength, ability check, or an athletics against your opponent. Then they can either do the same thing or roll a dexterity or an acrobatics to try to beat it. However, if they don't beat it, then that means they are grappled or you are grappled and your movement is at 0. If the person that's doing the grapple becomes incapacitated, then you're not grappled anymore. All right? And that's all that means. Grappled means you're being held onto. It doesn't mean anything else. Just means you can't go anywhere. You're right there. On your turn, you can also try to beat the grapple. In other words, you go back to either your strength, athletics, or your dexterity, acrobatics, and you try to beat their roll again. And if you do, then you're not grappled anymore. Number 6, incapacitated. Incapacitated actually goes along with other conditions, but in itself, it is a condition in itself. It means that you have no action, no reaction. That's all that means. That's it. And we'll get into incapacitated and other conditions. So let's move on to our final 7. Number 7, we're going to talk about invisible. If your opponent is invisible, that means you cannot see them whatsoever. The only way to counter this, if you make a perception check for hearing or looking for tracks, all right, then you have an idea kind of where they are. But the person that's invisible has advantage on attacks on the person that is not invisible. And the person that is not invisible has disadvantage on the attacks of the person that's invisible. And like I said, you basically have to know where they are to counteract that invisibility. So that means you're going to have to do some kind of perception or look for tracks or around that like that. If you have no idea where they are, it doesn't matter if you have disadvantage, you're not going to hit them. Here's something though, and I've seen this happen in a game. An archer that's way back is shooting arrows at opponents inside the thing. Some idiot that's invisible walks in the way of the arrow. Does that mean the person that's invisible doesn't get hit? No. If it tracks right through it, they will be hit. So be careful if you're invisible. Remember, spell slingers and archers can still probably hit you by accident. Okay, so that's it for the first 7 conditions. Like I said, if you have any questions or anything like that, just hit a comment below. Remember, hit that subscribe, that like, and that bell so you don't miss anything. And remember this, I'm Jimmy Lee, the Rude DM. Y'all come back now, you hear? And this is Ability Check. Roll it.